Joining me from the United States is Lenka White. She's a senior journalist who's tracking these developments. Ambassador Veena Sikri is a former top diplomat, and Professor Brahma Chilani is a well-respected strategic affairs analyst and a former advisor to India's National Security Council. Lenka White, let me begin by asking you, after Joe Biden dropped out of the race and endorsed Kamala Harris, is it smooth sailing for her all the way in this presidential race, or is she facing headwinds within the Democratic setup too? Are the Obamas endorsing her or just not as yet?
It's a great question. As you noticed, until now, nothing was smooth sailing. Yesterday in the morning, the campaign chair of Biden said that Biden is continuing his campaign, and few hours later, Biden withdrew all of a sudden. It's really been rocky for the Democrats. But to your question, they don't have time. Last time this happened was in 1968, and the candidate withdrew in March. Now it's July. They are really short of time. And Kamala Harris is, in a way, the only best fast options they have. So most of the Democrats have already supported Kamala Harris. They are still waiting on Democratic leaders such as Obama, Nancy Pelosi, Jeffries, Schumer, who are sort of a little bit more distance from that.
Okay.
Maybe if somebody better would come in. But to your question, I think they will have to go with it rather smoothly just because of the time pressure.
Okay, so perhaps at Chicago, there'll be clarity on this. Ambassador Sikri, does it appear to be Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris, at least as of now? Or could there still be a dark horse in the race to the White House?
Well, as I just mentioned, I think quite clearly that there is no time at all. And more than that, Kamala Harris is already joining the election campaign. She's already going to be canvassing as of tomorrow because President Joe Biden will no longer be joining the various Democratic campaign events that have been scheduled. So once she's going to already join the campaign schedule, it's going to be very difficult in the month of August, a month from now. The Democratic convention is just more than a month from now. Then at that time to then change and have another candidate is far, far too late. It is true that Bill and Hillary Clinton have endorsed her, but President Barack Obama and his wife Michelle have not endorsed her. Nancy Pelosi has not endorsed her yet, but maybe this is a question just of days, because once she's on the campaign trail, it's going to be very difficult to get somebody else to be endorsed. So more or less, we can take it that Vice President Kamala Harris is going to be the Democratic candidate for the elections.
Especially when in the Democratic camp, Professor Chilani, the conversation is get your wagons together, because the main aim is to ensure that Donald Trump doesn't reach the White House once again. How do you see these developments? Will it be Kamala Harris taking on Donald Trump in the race to the White House, sir?
Well, Gaurav, the reason why Biden was forced out of the presidential race is because, in the perception of the Democratic Party establishment, they've become too weak to defeat Donald Trump. The overriding goal of the establishment, the deep state in the US, is to prevent Trump from returning to the White House. But your question as to why Kamala Harris is the likely opponent of Trump, it's all about money.
Yes.
Biden is sitting on more than $200 million in cash. Lawfully, only Kamala Harris can utilize those funds because it was a Biden-Harris ticket that drew that money, those donations. So lawfully, only she can use those funds. And that's the reason why she's in a strong position to be the nominee. The Democratic Party is coalescing behind Kamala Harris. It'll be very difficult for anyone else to challenge her, and certainly because of the fact that she's sitting on so much cash, she has incredible momentum, even though she just started her campaign.
Okay, absolutely interesting you say that. The $240 million war chest tips the scale in her favor. Lenka White, there are analysts who argue that she will continue Joe Biden's policies. Some seem to believe that she'll just follow through with all his policies. Is that also the reading in the United States of America, whether it's with Israel or Ukraine, or in India's context vis-a-vis India?
Yes, I think Kamala Harris will not go far away from Biden's ideas. Definitely not on Ukraine. It's the whole idea of the democratic establishment to keep pumping weapons and money and supplies, anything to Ukraine, just to keep the war going. So I don't think it will divert from that. If anything, she could be stronger on abortion, as everyone is saying. She is a woman. It has been her topic since the beginning. She's there. I don't think, even though she's now the border czar, I don't think she can be any better on that, because as we all know, here we have 10 million illegal immigrants ever since they got into the office. So I don't think she can much push further on that. But if anything, then on abortion.
Okay, so, that may be one issue, but Ambassador Sikri, Lenka White mentions she's the border czar. Does that work in her favor, or given that mass illegal immigration that's taking place in the United States of America, that actually goes on to work against her?
Yes, I think some of the issues, I think on policy as such, she will definitely follow the policies of the Democratic government under President Joe Biden. And certainly as far as we in India are concerned, we've seen their interest on internal affairs in India, whether it is the CAA or the NRC, and, the whole question of what happened during India's recent elections. There's been a big report from the Disinfo Lab about interference in India's elections. And we know that, so that is all these are questions of worry. We also know that Vice President Kamala Harris has spoken about her Indian heritage, but she has not visited India in the last 3.5 years. She not visited India. There has not been much direct contact with her. So these are all issues that certainly, the people in India will be looking at. But on immigration, we've seen that President Trump has promised a much sterner policy, and it is known that the people of the USA are really worried and concerned about the huge amount of numbers that are pouring into America from the borders, from the southern borders, and this is going to be an issue that will have to be tackled will have to be spoken about by Vice President Kamala Harris as she does her campaign.
Okay. Professor Chilani, on issues like 317 Jammu and Kashmir or the Citizenship Amendment Act, the Democrats were seen as people who were interfering in India's internal affairs. Kamala Harris was quoted as saying Kashmiris should know they are not alone, or words to that effect. So in the White House, do you see her as, in case she makes it to the White House, more interfering in India's internal affairs?
The Democrats are, they carry all sorts of baggage, including human rights baggage that they use against even partners and allies. The Republicans are much more pragmatic in that sense. But the fact is that the general trajectory toward closer Indo-US strategic cooperation is unlikely to be altered in the post-Biden era. Booming American exports to India reinforce the bipartisan support in Washington for stronger and closer ties with India. Which administration can ignore India? India's international profile and geopolitical weight are growing. India is now the world's 5th biggest economy after surpassing Britain. And by next year, India is set to become the third largest economy by overtaking both Japan and Germany. So there is no way that any administration in Washington will seek to, in any way, downgrade the relationship with New Delhi. In fact, the relationship is going to continue to grow. But the fact is that when Trump was in the White House, those were the halcyon days of the US-India relationship. It was not because of the Houston rally or the Ahmedabad rally. It was because of fundamental shifts in policy that Trump administration instituted. He instituted fundamental shifts in US policies towards India's two regional adversaries, China and Pakistan. And he gave India pride of place in his Indo-Pacific strategy, including committing the US to help, quote unquote, accelerate India's rise. That is why US-India relations thrived during the Trump presidency.
Okay.
Biden came to office criticizing India on various issues during his campaign. And even though in office, he sought to continue his predecessor's efforts to strengthen relations with India, yet we have seen in recent months how his Secretary of State has sought to interfere in India's internal affairs and use the human rights card as sort of an instrument to beat India with.
Yes. So is that likely to continue? Ambassador Sikri, in your appreciation, should Kamala Harris make it to the White House? Because there are several issues that the Democrats are in many ways seem to be pretty close even to Pakistan, whether the Biden administration gives them the F-16s or gets them off the FATF or assists or helps them or looks the other way when they get off the FATF grey list despite doing nothing against terror, or that hard line on China, which is not as hard as the Trump line on China. How do you read this in the weeks and months ahead?
Yes, I think certainly President Trump's line on China has been far more realistic, far more pragmatic, far more in recognition of the hegemonistic role that China is trying to play in the world and trying to push America into accepting this G2, the American camp and the Chinese camp. Barack Obama and the Democrats are supporting the China on G2. In fact, it was Barack Obama's time that initiated this whole idea. Yes. So I think President Trump is much more realistic on that. We have always had better relations with Republican administrations and rather than Democratic administrations with their, always looking over the shoulders into the domestic affairs of India and trying to think that they can, legislate or talk about or pass judgment on everything happening in every corner of the world. So I think this has been a great problem with us, and we look forward actually to, the 4 years under President Donald Trump, which had led to a great improvement in the relationship. And let us see the next 4 years what happens in that. At the moment, the comparison in the polling ratings when President Joe Biden was the candidate were very much in President Trump's favor.
Yes.
No new ratings have come out right now after this change has taken place just today, but perhaps they do not expect a very big change in these polling ratings after Vice President Kamala Harris becomes the candidate.
Okay.
Let us see. It's a matter for the people of America to decide, and certainly we are all watching it with great interest because India is going to be very important.
It's the world's oldest democracy that's watching elections in the United States of America, seen as one of the largest democracies in the world. But Lenka White, what's it like in the US after this announcement that it's not Joe Biden, it's Kamala Harris, and who would be her running mate? Lots of speculation, but is that likely to make some dramatic change in favor of the Democrats?
It's been dramatic for about 1 month. As you can remember, there was the Trump-Biden debate. It went downhill. Then the attempt assassination against former President Trump. It was a disaster. And now suddenly Biden withdrawing. This was not really that unexpected. People thought that something will have to happen just based on the pressure which was officially put against Biden. Of course, no one expected he will do it offline. No one has seen a single picture of him ever since he put this major statement only via X platform, not even address the nation, nationwide. So it has been very strange way. In terms of Kamala Harris, she is ranking not the best, as one of the speakers already mentioned. She's having 46%, Trump is having 51%. We will, of course, see more and more polls pouring in as the time goes. Who knows if they are true? That's another thing.
Okay.
But I think Kamala Harris will have to pick a very strong vice president to sort of balance her out, because she's not the strongest candidate. We all know that. If you look online, her speeches are called so-called salad speeches or unburdened because she has very hard time talking publicly. And I don't know how they will get around this within like a 1 month of time.
Interesting you mentioned that, but there's also this issue about funding, Professor Chilani. Should India be concerned, and would India be concerned, the people who are funding Kamala Harris, her campaign, and especially elements like Soros?
Well, that's an issue, but just yesterday, after Biden announced his decision to drop out of the race, the Democrats collected $50 million, all in small donations. That is a record for a single day.
Yes.
They are flush with cash. So it's not just Soros or the big donors. It's the fact that from the grassroots, they're collecting a lot of money. But there's a larger issue here. The issue is this, that Biden may have dropped out of the race, but he still is the president for the next 6 months. If Biden is not physically and mentally fit to run for president again, how can we fit to remain as president for 6 more months?
And that debate is already raging in the United States of America.
Yeah, if he was forced out because he was not physically and mentally fit, but then somebody who's not fit, should he stay as president for 6 more months at a time when the U.S. is facing both domestic challenges, it's very polarized, and it's a very divided society, and internationally it's a very turbulent time.
And perhaps that's the baptism by fire that Kamala Harris will go through. But we'll be tracking that story very, very closely. I've unfortunately run out of time on this part of the show. And does the consensus appear to be that for India, it's the Republicans and Donald Trump who's likely to be better to take this relationship forward? Is that actually the case? We'll be tracking that. Will it be ab ki baar Trump Sarkar actually this time after a gap of 4 years? That is all I have for you on this show. To all my guests, many thanks for joining me.